Well, men, Brad, thanks for the welcome. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm very, very happy to be here. When Brad first sort of approached us, I was umming and ahhing because we had, up in East London, we had issues and I wasn't sure if it would work out. But I'm so glad it worked out and that we're here. It's so good to be with you. And it turns out that Sean and I, we know each other as well from way back. And so there are lots of connections actually. There are lots of connections. So as you see, the outline, talk 1, God's story, talk 2, their story, talk 3, our story. It's kind of like the focus is story. I was going to call this whole kind of like morning story time, but I'm very aware that sounds juvenile and a bit childish, and you probably wouldn't have pitched. But it is kind of story time, and I hope you'll see why. So the theme verse, which we're actually going to hit, Lord willing, in the next section, is this. It's on your outline there. But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So we start off session 1, the true story. The true story. I know something about all of you, even though we haven't met. What I know is that you love stories. From Robin Hood to James Bond, from Seven de Laan to Boer Soek Vrou, from Asterix to Romeo and Juliet, from Harry Potter to Jaws, from Barbie to the Terminator. You've got your favorite Netflix stuff, your soapies, whatever. You love stories. And Christians have a story to tell. We believe in one incredible fact, that in a world full of stories, full of heroes and villains and twists and turns and suspense and characters, one incredible fact, that there's only one true story. There's one true story, one grand narrative that subsumes and encompasses all our little stories. And we'll see that in a moment. The Bible has a way of encompassing every story ever told. The stories we tell imperfectly reflect the big story, His story. The Bible story, the true story, encompasses past, present, and future. It obviously begins long before us, and it points to the future way ahead of us. The Bible tells the story a bit, think of those Russian dolls. Are they called babushkas? Kind of like one in the other, in the other, in the other. At the very top, you've got this massive thing. Stories within stories within stories. There's one grand narrative, one big story. But literally, the Bible tells hundreds of stories, little stories in the big story. So the Bible tells the true story. We're not talking about spiritual truth here. We're not talking about spiritual like maxims. The Bible tells the true story. In fact, it's written in our DNA, says Paul in Romans 1:20. It's a story that you can't actually believe without a work of grace in your heart. And yet, it's a story which people long to hear and at the same time hate to hear, rebel against. So we're going to try condense the big story into 4 main bullet points with the main application coming critically at the end. So, most of you have a good sense of the story. It begins, there are two pictures of perfection. Okay? The story is bookended by two pictures of perfection. At the very beginning, it's Eden, and at the very end, it's the new heavens and the new earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 1:1. At the very end, the other picture of perfection, Revelation 21:1. And behold, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. It begins, how our stories begin is, the first story your mom and dad told you probably started like this. A long, long time ago, and it probably ended something like this, and they lived happily ever after. Okay, so are you ready to fly through sort of a helicopter ride over the big picture? And then we'll hit some application. In the beginning, God created. So bullet point 1, creation. In the beginning, God created. So, immediately there's a whole lot of stuff there that knocks out several worldviews and philosophies. We're not going to explore them all. But just the main points. Creation is God-made. Everything exists because of God. Everything exists for God. We live and move and have our being in God's good gifts to us. All things are related to God. Everything is related to good. Everything is good initially. And we are dependent creatures. Okay, we're dependent. We're not independent. We are dependent creatures. This creation tells us many things. Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God. So you wake up this morning and you see the beautiful Outeniquas out there. Those Outeniquas aren't just a big slab of rock. They're majestic mountains, and they tell us something about the Creator. Okay? Romans 1:19-20 puts it like this. That which is known about God is evident within them. This is all people. Stuff about God is evident with all people, within all people, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. Note those words. Clearly seen from what has been made. So creation tells us that God is creator, that is powerful, wise, eternal, generous, and kind, and it's written in our DNA. It's hardwired into us. So therefore, when you rub shoulders with people all the time during the week, one of the most important things about the people you come into contact with is that they have some knowledge of God already. Okay? It's there. Those messages about God are received loud and clear, but they're suppressed. Creation hums and buzzes and rustles and sings with songs to its creator. I love that quote. So imagine a majestic painting, a beautiful piece of art, and you know that like art didn't spontaneously self-exist. Okay? There's a story behind that art. There's an artist, a gifted person, tremendously gifted person with insight and skill and capabilities and imagination. And all that came out into the artwork. The painting reflects something of the artist. And so that's how creation and creator is paralleled. So men and women we are the pinnacle of God's creation. Men and women, specifically Eden, created for man and woman to enjoy. In fact, for man and woman to thrive. Created in the image of God. It speaks about our dignity, our value, our worth. I mean, this might sort of sound something off the deep end, but there really is something godlike about every human being. There's the imprint of God upon every single person you come across. That means every single person you come across is inherently religious. The religions will differ, and the religions will look different, and the lingo that comes out the mouth will sound different. But every single person is religious. So for the first couple in the garden, it's really all about relationships. Relationship with God, relationship with each other, relationship with the physical world. They're placed in the garden to worship God and to enjoy God, and to glorify God and enjoy His good gifts. So the paradise of Eden was how it was meant to be. It was all holy ground, men and women living under the gracious lordship of God, perfectly in relationship with each other. The whole experience was meant to be absolutely fantastic. All parts of human life, relationships, work, food, everything, rest, nothing tainted by sin or brokenness. It's actually hard for us to even imagine that. Now, that is what we were created for, and that is what we long for. So, Christmas is coming. Imagine the advertising for the December holidays. It always looks appealing, doesn't it? Hey, those December holidays, those vacations that are advertised in exotic places. All the ads promise an experience of paradise, of perfection. And you look at the adverts, you look at the pictures and the photos. Families are always smiling. Have you noticed that? People are always healthy and well. No one ever gets sick on these trips. There are no worries, no anxieties. Every night is party night, and every night is an absolute joy. There are no feuds. No one has disagreements. The food is sumptuous. It's utopia. This holiday, says the advert, is going to be life-changing. Now, where does that come from? It comes from somewhere. It's not just random. You see, though our best holidays don't produce the goods, and I'm not saying don't go on holiday, I'm not that cynical. Go on holiday and enjoy it. It's a good gift, by all means. But though our experiences disappoint us, there's something within us that says, there's this paradise. There's more than this. And that whole thing haunts us. You know why? Because paradise was real. Paradise was real. There's something glorious about going back to Eden. And it's there. There's something within us. So all those holidays which promise this fantastic break, the hammock, the sunset, the drinks on that idyllic island, where does it come from? The most popular genre of movie is it's the love story. Now, I know speaking to a bunch of men, that might not thrill you. Like the ladies would be going wild now, but okay. The love story, where does that come from? There's a love story in the creation. Genesis chapter 2. You know, Adam names all the animals, and I'm sure he's happy naming the animals, but the animals don't quite do it for him. And God puts Adam to sleep, takes his rib, and he fashions Eve. And when Adam sees Eve, he bursts out in poetry. The first poem, in fact, the first human dialogue in the Bible is poetry, and it's romantic poetry. Now, I know you hear this at weddings. This is the poem. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she's taken out of man. When you hear that in weddings, it's kind of like in a very sort of dry, analytical, like propositional way. Like, the reality is that's a poem. If you are into Hebrew, that's a poem. And my very rough, totally uninspired, heretical translation of that poem is, Adam said, boy, now we're talking. Don't quote me. Okay, so that's point one. Point two, fall. Fall. So every morning we wake up, and it's like a reality check. Well, it's not like that, is it? It's nothing like, it's not paradise. There's tragedy all over the place. There's heartache all over the place. There's trouble all over the place. Not only out there, but here. There's trouble here. It's not the way things were meant to be. So what happened? Well, there's a catastrophe recorded for us in Genesis 3. Adam and Eve have got this wide permission, this glorious wide, do anything, enjoy, thrive. There's this like one prohibition. Don't. And Adam and Eve, they dine with the devil at the table or at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They rebel against God. They cross the line, they sin. And all hell breaks loose on earth. And the consequences are immediate and very far-reaching. There's brokenness, there are messed up relationships. There's exile from the garden, separation from God. The very next chapter, there's murder in the family. There is spiritual and physical death. And that sin has ruined every dimension of human existence. Not just human existence, but the whole world. Relationships broken up in all directions. God with our neighbors. Every single news flash you see, wherever it is, any part of the world, it's actually predicated on the fall. No news would make any sense without the fall being real. In fact, one guy, I forget who he was, he was an unbeliever, but he said the one Christian doctrine which can be proved empirically, in other words, scientifically, with data, the one Christian doctrine which is absolutely true is the doctrine of the fall, of the sinfulness of man, because there is a mass of supporting data. I mean, anyone who walks around with their eyes open and half a brain cell has to acknowledge that. So Paradise Lost is written all over us. It's written in our hearts, in our experiences out there in the world. I mean, at the moment, there is one massive conflict in Eastern Europe. It's the biggest war since World War II. It's a massive business. And that's now overshadowed by the Middle East. Atrocities. Do you know that I've been listening to the newscasts. I can't watch too much of it. It's just too much. But I've heard commentators, secular commentators, use the word depravity. When they talk about that trouble and what Hamas has done in the Gaza Strip, secular people have used the word depravity. The central feature of our depravity or our fallenness is idolatry. Exchanging the glory of God for created things, and then worshiping those created things. So idolatry takes a good thing and turns it into a God thing. Idolatry takes a good thing and turns it into an ultimate thing, the thing. So you give your child a bicycle for Christmas because you are a loving parent and you want to bless your child. give him a good gift. The child happily accepts the gift. And instead of thanking you from his heart, he turns away from you and starts thanking the bicycle. I flat out reject you, but this bicycle is awesome. It will change my life. That's what people do. So the physical world itself is fallen. The physical universe is scarred. I mean, again, just the last 3 weeks. Earthquake in Morocco, thousands dead. Floods in Libya, thousands dead. Earthquake in Afghanistan, a few days, thousands dead. The wisest man who lived apart from Christ said in his opening sermon, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. So we could liken the world to a sort of faded beauty, a glamour girl. Perhaps she was sort of Miss World in 1975. In all the glossy magazines, she was the talk of the tabloids. She hung out with all the A-list celebrities. 1975, so now it's almost 50 years later. Maybe she's, 85, 90. And she's a faded beauty. She looks hammered. She's got miles on the clock. And her body's collapsed. I mean, she's had the Botox, she's had all the nips and tucks, and the whole thing is imploded. And she looks rather sad now. And she's reflecting back. And she's thinking to herself, my word, how things have changed. It's just totally, totally different. The point is that there's not a song, a poem, a movie, a series, a video game, a book that is not predicated on the fall. In fact, I bet you, in some ways, all your jobs, all your professions are related directly to the fall. G.K. Chesterton, in the UK, a long time ago, in the 1800s, the UK, one of the main newspapers, I forget which one, posed this question. What is wrong with the world? Simple question. But you can imagine what is wrong with the world. I mean, you can imagine, like, how do you reply to that? You need like a small book. Okay, so the guys write back to the newspapers. G.K. Chesterton writes this, Dear Mr. Editor, I am. See, the problem's not just out there. It's much closer to home. Okay, redemption. The third main bullet point. I mean, we love heroes, don't we? Throughout our history, our imaginations run wild with hero hunger, from James Bond to Superman. Okay? Our stories typically have good guys and bad guys. I mean, I was growing up, there was this thing called Bonanza in the early days of TV. Anyone remember Bonanza? It was like westerns and like this western thing, this family on the farm. And I mean, the good guys were the family on the farm. The bad guys were the Indians. The Indians were always causing grief. But somehow at the end, the Bonanza guys always won. The story never changed. And we were always engrossed. Cause? Why is that? We have an appetite for a deliverer. And the reason we have an appetite for a deliverer is because we need one. Though we don't put it like that. It's interesting that I just glanced at your statement of faith quickly. Right there at the top, near the top is, we believe that we need rescue. Yeah. That's a fundamental of the Christian faith. That's like fundamental to the gospel. We need rescue. We need someone to save us. That's in virtually every story, in one form or another. So Genesis 3, there's this developing theme of a great deliverer who is to come, a rescuer, a savior. He's going to come, he's going to squash Satan and all the powers of evil, and he's going to bring restoration. In the Old Testament, many leaders come and go. Some of the greatest names in world history. Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon. Big names. But they all have feet of clay. The problem with all those men is that they've got too much Adam flowing in their veins. They can't do it because they carry Adam. And then the story takes a staggering turn. You could not have invented it. The story of Jesus doesn't begin in Bethlehem. It begins in heaven, in the councils of the triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, agrees to a divine rescue mission. He will be incarnated. He will be enfleshed. He will have flesh exactly like your flesh. Exactly like your flesh. He'll be incarnated. He will come. He will serve. He will deliver. He will rescue. So he descends to the womb of a peasant woman. Probably a teenage peasant woman. He's born in a stable. You could not have written this. His life and his ministry astound everyone. They haven't heard stuff like this. They haven't seen stuff like this. His teaching causes astonishment. Some people love it. Other people, it just rubs them up the wrong way completely. And by the way, his favorite mode of teaching was to tell stories. So then you fast forward, say 3 years, you see him on a cross. He's been deserted by his friends. He's been subject to the greatest failure of justice ever. He's beaten, he's mocked, he's spat upon, the one from heaven. The sky turns black, he breathes his last, the earth quakes, and the whole thing just seems a hopeless failure. Can you imagine the Jerusalem journalists tweeting, "What a loser." For 3 days his body is in the grave. On the third day, Jesus rose. It's the miracle of miracles. It trumps every other miracle. It's just in another league. It's the event that changes everything. It's the event that changes you and I. He ascends to the Father and he sends the Spirit. Now, he is a completely different kind of deliverer. Completely. He's humble, he's not flashy. He's not the alpha male type. Okay? He's a servant. He redeems, he delivers not by his life, but by his death. Not by his charisma and his force of personality, but coming and serving us. Serving you, serving me. He redeems not by his ability to whoop up a crowd in a frenzy, by bamboozling people with crazy oratory. No, no, no. He redeems by humility. He redeems by death. He conquers by death. His greatest achievement, the mode of delivery, is not by him holding on to power, exactly the opposite, by giving up power. And where he seems to be the weakest is actually at his most powerful. So you know our stories are divided into good guys and bad guys, and the deliverer ultimately comes for the good guys and nails the bad guys. See, this is where this story is different, because Jesus comes for the good guys. No, there are only bad guys. Okay? There are only bad guys. And the scope of his redemption is not just kind of like spiritual. It's cosmic. As the whole cosmos, as the whole world fell, the whole world is restored through the work of Christ. Colossians 1:19. God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, that's Christ, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or in things in heaven. All things. So we love stories of salvation. We love it. We know when the good guy wins at the end, we cheer. We love it. We know where the stories are going, and yet we love hearing them again and again. Is Jack Reacher going to get taken out by the Albanian thugs? I mean, Jack Reacher's got a penknife. 5,000 Albanian thugs have got rocket launchers and AK-47s. Is Jack Reacher going to get taken out? No, of course not. Is James Bond going to get killed? Did you watch the last James Bond? He got killed. It's okay, this destroys my illustration. How can James Bond get killed? I mean, that's just totally, it should never, ever happen. But they kill him. You know why? To be all politically correct. Then evidently the next James Bond's going to be a woman. Probably a vegan lesbian. But, because they've got all woke. But, I mean, you can't kill James Bond. Okay, fourth bullet point. New creation. You must have noticed, let me point it out, refresh you, that there's such an obvious connection between the very beginning and the very end of the Bible. It's so stark. First 2 chapters of Genesis, final 2 chapters of Revelation. I mean, you see the parallels there. In both cases, men and women living under the gracious rule of God, living in his immediate presence, living in his good creation, enjoying him, enjoying his good gifts, and glorifying him non-stop, forever and ever. You see man in perfect sync with the whole created order. No sin, no curse, no bitterness, no regret, no remorse, nothing like that. Everything is good all the time, from beginning to end. Well, the end tells us that history is going somewhere. It's not like a Hindu situation where it cycles. No. We're going somewhere. It's linear. A point is coming. By God's grace, we will enjoy a life. Not a spiritual, super spiritual life, in some cloud with some harp somewhere. You get your own cloud and you get your own harp. No, an embodied life in the new heavens and then a new earth. And for Paul, that picture is so grand, it's so big, it's so good. He says it almost defies description. You can't imagine. He says your eyes, your ears, your mind, you can't imagine. So it's from a garden, Genesis 1, to a city, Genesis 22, 21 and 22. But here's the thing, you see, you don't, I don't want a concrete jungle. But you read about the city, it's not a concrete jungle. It's a city with sparkling rivers, with glorious green belts, with trees, with fruit. Try imagine fan court on steroids, and then steroids, and more steroids. The story ends, and they lived happily ever after. And you have to repeat the story to your children again and again and again. Why do you have to repeat? Because we are insecure in a dangerous world. And we feel it. We know it. We are insecure. We are vulnerable. We are inadequate in a very, very dangerous world. So they lived happily ever. In other words, everything will be okay. That's how the story ends. But let me just put in one major qualification. It's not quite like that. God's people lived happily ever after. God's people. Okay, so I hope that's been of some help, just the sort of big picture stuff. But here's sort of one major application, and this is the critical part. You've arranged a coffee date with a friend because you care for your unbelieving friend, and you really want to tell him kind of like what makes you tick. You want to tell him about the most important reality in your life. That's the gospel. So you think to yourself, well, I've got an hour with him, perhaps. Let me let me produce John 3:16, because it's my favorite text. For God so loved the world. And you're sitting there and you speak to him about Jesus and eternal life and sin and the cross, which is, of course, is all very good, because those are the big things. And he listens, and he's listening politely. His response is, he doesn't get it. Okay? He's polite, and his attitude is, well, sort of, I'm glad that works for you. I can see it works for you. But yes, I just don't get it. Now, why don't they get it? Why doesn't he get it? Well, there are a couple of reasons. I mean, the heavy theological reasons, but let me just give you one reason. The reason why your friend wouldn't get it is because he has absolutely no idea of the big picture. If you don't know the big picture, and you just pull out a text and say, I'm going to just explain this to you quickly, the guy will look at you in a kind of dazed way because it sounds weird and irrelevant. Imagine this scenario. You pop in at a friend, you just like rock up unannounced. Your friends are watching a movie, like one of the old classics. And so you rock up sort of 2/3 into the movie. So they've been sitting there for an hour, 75 minutes watching this, and you rock up. And your friends are absolutely mesmerized by this movie. They're sitting on the edge of their seats. If you whisper, they get cross with you. They're totally taken in with this thing. The characters, the dialogue. You're watching this thing, you think it's absolutely, I don't get what they're getting. It's like, to me, it looks distinctly ordinary. Now, why are they into it and you not into it? The answer is obvious. What's the answer? They've been there from the beginning, and this dialogue, it's kind of like being a slow build-up. I mean, they know the characters. They know the plot. They've sensed things happening. And therefore, the words and the people and the twists and the turns, it's all immensely important. It all makes sense within the context of the big picture. You don't get it? Of course you don't get it. I mean, the reason is obvious. So here's the point, just to take us into the next session. When we share the good news of Jesus, today, in our world, it's probably not the best idea just to produce a text. You know, the magician pulls a rabbit out of the bag, and everyone goes, "Oh, wow, where did he get that from? Like, what's the secret? Like, how does he do it?" It's like just this thing. And we shouldn't be it's probably not the best idea to pull the rabbit out the bag. 40 years ago, it was different. If you're one of the senior men, one of the veteran men here, I'm sure you can identify with that. 40 years it was different. Why? Because non-Christians had some sense of biblical literacy. They were unbelieving, but they had a sense of the big picture. Not only did they have a sense of the big picture, but there was like a latent sense of the fear of God in society. There's biblical illiteracy now. People don't know the story. And there's very, very little sense of the fear of God out there, even in the church sometimes. So here's the thing. You want to share the good news of Jesus with your friends, you've probably got to start a lot further back than you think you've got to start. And let me tell you, as this is the last two sentences, the good news about that is that it's very easy to do. I'm not saying it's very easy to get people converted, no. But what I'm saying is it's a very easy to get people into the story. We'll look at a bit. You don't have to be a boffin. Okay, you don't have to be a theological tycoon. It is easy to get people into the big story. You have opportunities every day that you probably don't even notice. Okay, that is spiel one.